Hello, good evening, and Jule as we greet in Ladakh, and Vanakkam in Chennai. Vanakkam. Great feeling being here at the other end of the country, bringing you greetings from the top end of the brings its greetings to Tamil Nadu. Really grateful, making me feel at home in many ways, including an overly air-conditioned hall, to make me feel really at home. Because when I came, it was minus 20 degrees. And with the humidity, it feels close to home here also. I'll share with you a little bit about my journey in the education system on the fringes of our country in Ladakh, and maybe it is useful for some insights for the rest of the nation also. I'll start with my own story. So I was doing engineering as a mechanical engineer, and very luckily, I would say, I had some problems at home, and because of which I had to teach students in their 10th class so I could support my own engineering education. But that led me from one thing to the other into education completely. When I started teaching the students, my aim was really to support my own education, which I did more than well. But soon I saw that these students who were so bright otherwise failed miserably in the state exams, especially the 10th grade board exams. And as they just said, 95% of the students would fail every year repeatedly in the 10th grade exams. And yet, when I was teaching them in the ways they could understand, they were very bright. There was nothing wrong with them. Actually, it was only the system that was against them in every way. I soon saw that what they studied or memorized in their textbooks in the schools made no sense whatsoever to the lives that they lived or were to live. So, with no context, with no relevance, it was actually natural that they would lose interest and not do well. Just to take a small example, these children in the extreme remote parts of Ladakh, where temperatures in winter would be minus 30, would be sitting in a nomadic classroom, memorizing words from an alien language like English, which makes no sense to the area, and concepts like A for apple, B for ball, fine, but F for fan in minus 30 degrees makes no sense at all, right? So children end up finding the example more complicated than the problem itself. The idea of this pedagogy was that fan would make the squiggle, abstract squiggle F, simpler for the children. But when you give an example of a fan, they don't understand what the contraption is, and the teacher even has not seen and explains, I don't know, but it is supposed to keep you cool. And the children wonder why anybody needs to be colder than they are in minus 30 degrees. Yeah. So that was how education was, and everything else was just copied and pasted from cities like Srinagar in those days, in the textbooks, and straight away pasted in at 13,000 feet, making no sense at all. So I learned slowly as I got interested in why these students were failing and what could be changed, I understood and respected the children much more because there was nothing wrong with them. But at our system, which did not respect any diversity of context and just blanket solutions copied from one place, pasted somewhere else, soon I realized that it actually didn't help people in Srinagar also, from where it was copied and pasted. They too suffered the same because things in their textbooks were all copied from New Delhi and pasted in Kashmir. And then a copy of that was pasted in Ladakh. So a copy of a copy of a copy would reach the mountains of Ladakh, by which time it would be hardly legible, figuratively speaking. Then I understood much later that it actually didn't make much sense in Delhi either, because it was just a copy of something in London, which doesn't help this nation as well. It took me many more years into education full time to finally learn that actually it didn't make much sense in London either to begin with. with, with things completely irrelevant, outdated from 300 years ago, when during industrialization, the purpose of education was to exploit nature and produce and consume. And today, in the 21st century, when we are suffering the consequences of that, we cannot have the same thing. Somebody wise said, if you give this more and more of the same input, you'll get more and more of the same output. So we are, on one hand, fueling the same things in our schools and lamenting about the outputs that we are getting. Of course, we will, unless we change and contextualize things by now to heal the planet and to undo all the consequences of the 300 years of education that we have had. So I got so interested in the field of education that after I finished, or during my engineering, I decided I would rather go back to Ladakh and set this system right. I didn't see any point in, adding to the long queues of engineers waiting for jobs. Instead, I said, why not change the system for those who were, for no fault of theirs, shackled and couldn't perform and were made to feel like failures after spending a precious quarter of their lives in this system called schooling. So I went back and, together with other like-minded young people, started a movement to change this system. And since most of the children were in rural areas, in government schools, our aim was to change the system there. So we did what we could within the limits of a government system by changing the textbooks to more contextual, curriculum that made sense to children in mountainous Ladakh, changing the F for fan and all those things. Similarly, we trained the teachers so they could handle and engage children in more interesting, active learning methods. Similarly, we organized people to take ownership of their schools so that they become, stewards of the system. And with these interventions, slowly the school results started changing. And as was mentioned, from 5%, it slowly went to 18%, 26%, 35%, and 55% in some 7 years, and then slowly to 75%. Now, that was the school's, conventional school part of it. It really doesn't mean a lot in that kind of system, just increasing the percentage doesn't really mean you enhance the learning experience so much. So by that time, we thought, when the results started hovering around 75%, we said, okay, this system has become a little better, and the government should take it forward, whereas we should focus more on those who still failed, the 25% that still failed. It's a smaller number, but it is serious. 25%, even 1% is serious if, it touched you or your child. Otherwise, you take it as a statistics, right? So we started working towards these children who still failed, who we believed had nothing wrong with them. And what we did with them, for these students, actually was a great learning experience and a great journey, a little bit of which I'll share with you now. So, together with a batch of so-called failure students, some 20 of them, some of us went to a place in the middle of nowhere, in a desert by the river Indus, and thought of establishing a school which would flow with the rhythm of nature and how nature perhaps meant young humans to learn. Our belief was that if in a very bad system, some people fail, then maybe there's something right about them. No? The system is bad and you could be good and therefore fail. The system, as you would know, was one where perfectly bright and bubbling young teenagers would be put in classrooms, or rather trapped, made to sit still for hours, listening to lectures and scribbling on papers, and that was their education. Whereas we thought that human young ones were not supposed to learn in these ways. We have actually, perhaps never in our history of evolution, taught our young ones like this, by making them sit and memorize things from books and lectures. Today we hear of so-called progressive schools from the West, talking about experiential education, learning by doing. And I find it very sad that India, which had such great traditions of exactly that, learning experientially in gurukuls, learn or ape what comes from the West in IBs and Cambridges of the world, to go back to experiential learning. I would think that learning was never anything but by doing. If you look at the evolutionary history of human beings, we have never learned otherwise. Always human young ones have learned by being with grown-ups, imitating, failing, and learning by doing. As hunter-gatherers, you can imagine, our young ones were always out in nature, in the wilderness, exposed to dangers, to even life, and learn that way. As settled farmers for tens of thousands of years, they were again out in action, doing and thereby learning. Never ever was it that they would be made to sit and chant or memorize and call that learning. And my belief is that because of this way of learning by doing for millions of years, Evolution took care of it, and human young ones were packed with lots of energy that was important to deal with this phase when they had to learn a lot. And this energy, which was like a gift of nature, was what made them go through this process. And suddenly, then, 300 years ago, we start making them learn by putting them in kind of factory schools, into classrooms, in large groups, and making them, as I said, sit still, memorize, learn, strip them of all action, the thrill, the use of energy, and so on. And that is what I hypothesize, I would say. There could be more research, could be the reason why the whole world talks about teenager rage, rebellion, and problems. All this energy that nature wired us with through evolution is suddenly in this system made to redundant, in classrooms that we have designed. And then that energy has to come out some way in uglier forms of teenager rage and rebellion. This I realized while growing up in Ladakh and later meeting people from big cities who would always tell me about teenager problems, and I would never understand what is this teenager problem they are talking about. I had never known or heard about any such thing. So I thought maybe this is something cultural or racial we don't have in Ladakh, because in Ladakhi villages, young adults are considered very important and they perform very responsible positions. And what was this about irresponsible teenagers? I wondered and discarded it as something, that happens with other cultures or races and doesn't happen in Ladakh. Until after 10 or 15 years of urbanization in Leh city of Ladakh, I started seeing those very trends in Leh in Ladakh. So that's when I understood that it was nothing racial or so, but when you strip young adults of all that nature's design had for their learning and make them sit in schools and classrooms and do nothing but read, it comes to that. When their energies come out, it comes out in uglier ways. So, the problem we realized while doing this school with the so-called failures of the system, that learning is not really what we are told it is from London or New York when they say 3 R's of education: reading, writing, and arithmetic. This we realized was a very wrongly misrepresented form of education. Reading, writing, arithmetic. The 3 R's are all to do with only the head, and head. And that's what education got confined as. Whereas, what I realized in Ladakh and in the rest of India and ancient cultures, education was never only about the head alone. And therefore, in Ladakh, we termed it as 3 H's rather than 3 R's. Head, definitely very important. All the, languages and algebra and so on are important, but equally important is the skills of the hands. So therefore, skills of the hands is what is missing and what we seem to be bringing back from the West again, after having first brought the head, and now we seem to be, imitating these IBs and Cambridges for experiential learning. But as I said, education was never anything but experiential in the past. So therefore, making it something that engages children, making it something that applies what they learn in the textbooks and solves problems of the people is what makes education meaningful. Actually, we always scold our children for forgetting their lessons. I think the lessons are so forgettable when you just chant them. How can we blame the children? Why not make the lessons themselves unforgettable by making it more applied so that more senses are involved in acquiring that knowledge? Yeah? When you do things, when you apply things in life, then you are using all your senses, and the lessons then become unforgettable rather than scolding the children for forgetting their lessons. So, our experience with these failing students helped us learn ourselves that for effective transmission, retention, and utilization, the lessons better be more engaging, more applied, so that they then can use it to solve problems in real life. So, therefore, the skills of the hands become a very important part of learning, the second H of the three H's that I just said. But then, skills of the hands alone is not enough, is what we realize, because you could have very fine and sharp skills of the hands and do a lot of damage to the world. Actually, that's what is happening. With bright heads and skilled hands, we're doing a lot of damage. Not only, a pickpocket who has very skilled hands and a bright head can give you a lot of problems, but the entire development industry with just these two and without the wisdom and compassion of the heart has done a lot of damage on this planet. And therefore, I believe that a nation like India, which has had great traditions, not only of head and hands, but of the heart, which has given to the world yoga and vipassana, should not be reduced to a nation begging from IBs and Cambridges, should be actually teaching the world how holistic education should be done, right? And that's why we said education should be about not just head and not even just hands, but extend to the third edge of kind, compassionate hearts. And that's when your hands and head would never be misused, would always be used for the well-being and welfare of the planet, all the sentient beings, not just humans. So that's what is needed today. And our schools, rather than becoming a shadow of what they might have in the West, where only some exams on paper, with books that have paper knowledge, with something at the end which is like a paper degree, everything paper. We need to go to more applied, hands-on, and applied also in the field of kindness and compassion, because you can understand what we are doing to the rest of the planet when we have made so-called great advances in science, technology. With the current education system, we often celebrate a lot our achievements, but I'm more touched by what we have lost in the process. I don't know if you know, but in recent years, there was a report from WWF which said that between 1970 and 2012, roughly 42 years, 52% of the world's wildlife has vanished. 52% of the wildlife has vanished. Species have gone, completely extinct, and yet we talk about advancement. Yeah, I'll say. Okay. advancement and progress, it could be some progress for some human beings, but what we have done to the rest of the planet, how could the deer and the rabbits and the elephants call it progress? So, therefore, our education system has to be somewhat more complete if we are to call it something that leads to well-being of the whole planet. So now here I will request for a small video which maybe relates what I'm talking about more to you, because otherwise I'm talking about a world that you cannot imagine up in the mountains. So may we have that short video so we get a little bit better understanding of this school that I'm talking about and the system that I'm talking about. Yeah? I've never let my schooling interfere with my education. So said Mark Twain. How about you? Do you miss your school or college days? You perhaps do, but perhaps not for the classrooms and teachings. You actually perhaps wished every day that the school be closed the next day so you could stay home. But here's a school in Ladakh where the most dreaded punishment is to be sent home for 2 weeks, where students learn by doing things, where they engage in various innovations to solve real-life problems like climate change, where they run the school themselves like a little country with an elected government and learn management and governance that way, where they learn communication by running the campus newspaper and radio, science by designing and building their own school, solar-heated mud buildings that stay at plus 15 even when minus 15 winters. Kindness and compassion through introspection and meditation. A school where the criteria of admission is not your percentage, but that the conventional system has failed you. Hi, I'm Sonam Wangchuk from Ladakh, a remote mountain region in the Indian Himalayas. 25 years ago, when I was finishing my own engineering education, I saw that schools were a pain for everyone. But for mountain children, it was doubly painful and irrelevant. Children who spoke Ladakhi or Tibetan at home were made to sit all day memorizing in alien languages like Urdu or English. F for fan, S for ship, T for train. Till recently, every year, 95% of the students used to fail in the all-important 10th grade exams. Together with like-minded friends, we launched SECMOL, the Students' Educational and Cultural Movement of Ladakh, and said enough is enough. Working with the government, we rewrote many textbooks, retrained the teachers, and organized the villagers. And the results started changing too. For those who still failed, we started the alternative school that you just saw. And the results? Tewang Rigzin went on to become a top journalist and later became the education minister of Ladakh Hill Council at 27. He had failed his 10th grade 5 times. Stanzin became a filmmaker and has been winning awards across countries. He had failed 4 times. Miss Timless is today a celebrated social entrepreneur. She had failed 3 times. But now we see that the state of higher education is no better. Not only for Ladakhis, who of course are doubly disadvantaged again, but for you in the big cities too. It's time we change this. We in Ladakh are dreaming again. This time our dream is to create an alternative university that will use all our learnings from the past 25 years. Once again, a hands-on doers university, where the School of Business runs real-life companies on campus. The School of Tourism runs high-end hotels and simple homestays. The School of Education runs innovative schools. The revenues from these sustain the university while the students get free higher education and of course hands-on experience. But this is more than a dream now. His Holiness Chethang Rinpoche, one of the top spiritual leaders in Tibetan Buddhism after His Holiness the Dalai Lama, is supporting this cause as the chief patron. The Hill Council government of Ladakh has earmarked roughly 200 acres of land, and the ice stupa artificial glaciers have already started greening this desert. A fully solar-heated, mud-built university township is being planned by some of India's top architects. Together, let's start the next learning revolution, where education is not limited to just the 3 R's, all too much to do with the head alone, where skills of the hands and kindness of the heart are given equal importance. Sure, it would take significant financial resources to materialize this ambitious dream. Recently, I was awarded the prestigious Rolex Award for Enterprise for the ice stupa artificial glaciers.
Sonam Wangchuk.
I contribute my Rolex Award as a seed for this cause. Thank you very much. I've decided to contribute the roughly 1 crore rupees as a seed fund to finally raise 150 crore rupees for the first phase of the project. And I very much hope that you all will join me and match this contribution according to your capacities. Together, we can change the face of higher education forever, not just for Ladakh, but for the whole world. So join us. The future has already begun. Thank you. Thank you very much. So I'll just say in the end, since it is running out of time, that we need a lot of brainstorming or head storming, hand storming and heart storming in this country to choose an education system that was more the way in our country than to just blindly ape what crumbs come from the West. Yeah? So apart from this, I would appeal to you at the very end to also follow a path of development which is not as destructive as we have landed in. And for that, we recently launched a movement called I Live Simply. And I won't take longer. I'll just appeal to you to look it up and make your contributions, not in money, but by pledging to find a path towards a development which actually works for the well-being of all humans and living beings of the planet. Thank you very much.